Good morning, folks, and welcome to this session of the Florida Library's online Fostering Resilient Communities virtual conference. My name is Raymond Neal, and I am the Continuing Education Coordinator for Nephlin. This session is part of our Friends and Support Groups track, which is brought to you by Nephlin. This session is Cultivating Networks to Build a Safety Net with Lawrence Webster. Lawrence is a library consultant specializing in community engagement, board development, and library public policy advocacy. She has worked with state library agencies and professional associations, as well as individual libraries and systems. As a trainer and facilitator, she is known for a tailored hands-on approach to creating a lively learning experience, designing workshops so participants leave with real practical ways to put new information into practice. She also works with related organizations in the arts and media, as well as government agencies concerned with libraries and cultural life. She believes that libraries need a vigorous citizen involvement to remain relevant and viable. A philosophy major, she holds a master's degree in religious studies from Florida State University and an MLS from State University of New York, Albany. She has published 2 books and several articles. Now, to the housekeeping bit for today, you can ask questions along the way in the chat box. Please refrain from raising your hand because it gets a little confusing visually there. Just go ahead and type your question or comment into the chat box, but make sure that you have all panelists and attendees selected as your distribution there. Otherwise, it's just going to go to myself and Lawrence, and you want everybody to see these comments, possibly. But otherwise, your microphone will be muted throughout today's presentation. So just use the chat box there. Also, you will receive an email shortly after today's conference containing a link to a brief survey on your experiences with the conference. Please complete the survey. This gives us guidance on developing events for Florida library staff and makes an impact on our funding for the future. You will also receive a link to a copy of the recording of this session. Now, without any further ado, let's welcome Lawrence Webster. Lawrence, you ready to go?
There we are. Can everybody hear me now? I'm checking.
Yes, we can.
You can hear me. Okay. Good morning, everybody. And I am delighted that you're here. I can't see your faces. This is a new world for most of us. But I can see that there are 24 participants listening in. 25. We just got a new person signing on. So welcome. And I am delighted that you're here. And I will be building on many of the things Rebecca said in her quite wonderful keynote, and with a specific view to Friends of the Library, and I mean that in a broad sense, not just Friends of the Library formal groups, but also Friends of the Library, the very engaged library users, you know who they are, and how those folks contribute to resilient libraries and what we're really talking about today, resilient communities. I came across some interesting thoughts in the current issue of American Libraries. And both of these quotes focus on the importance of libraries in any kind of difficult time. But Tracy Hall, the ALA executive director, reminded us that any recovery effort from this current huge challenge of the global challenge of COVID-19 must be accompanied by wide dissemination of information to the public. That's all the public. And who does this better than libraries? I submit with Tracy, nobody. So we are already positioned to be key players in any kind of recovery effort from the current situation. The other important person, Stacey Abrams, who is a writer and a Georgia politician, and has come out with a fairly new book called Our Time Is Now. She's an activist who works within existing political systems, more than disrupting, perhaps. And her point about libraries is interesting to me and something I've always believed but never said out loud, which is that we become better people when we have access to knowledge. So if we can level that playing field where everyone has equivalent access to all kinds of knowledge, whether it's how to or how governments work, we're all going to be better people. And I think it's important to understand that the library is a vital, essential institution. Carla Hayden, our wonderful Librarian of Congress, also emphasized that libraries and democracy go hand in hand. Without libraries, it would be a lot harder to run a democracy, because free and equal information, once again, available to everyone as they make decisions about their own democracy and where it's going to go, is absolutely crucial. Whether people are using it or not is another issue that we probably can't talk about here today. But we can talk about resilience for these incredibly important institutions and how we contribute to resilience of a community. First, a definition. I looked up a lot about resilience, thinking, of course, I know what it means. Turns out it started as a scientific term to very precisely measure the ability of something like a spring or a rubber band to snap back after it had been stressed, and studies of the degree of stress that it can take before it's sprung or unsnappable is a part of the resilience when you're talking about physics or engineering. But in general, it can be expanded to be the capacity of any system, whether it's you or your woods behind your house or a whole big city or a national or global economy. It's the capacity of that system to deal with change, but also continue to thrive, to develop. Or yet another nuanced meaning that I think is well worth remembering, it's how we can use those disturbances to spur renewal and innovative thinking. I know we're all a little tired of hearing about, well, it's not all terrible with COVID. You know, many of us have learned how to work remotely, or telemedicine's taken off, or we're finding the kindnesses, the small, wonderful things about people. And all of those things are true, but this is not to diminish the difficulty of a crisis either. But I do think most crises we can take and make the change work. Some other things about resilience that I think are important, and this applies to individual resilience, community resilience, or organizational resilience. Resilient communities, resilient people are flexible and agile and adaptable and pliable and stretchy, supple and elastic. All of those are kind of synonyms for resilient. And it most specifically is not rigid or stiff or hard or unyielding or in any way brittle. So if you feel, libraries can sometimes congeal in their habits and processes and activities and rules and regulations into a little bit stiff and rigid when they didn't mean to. It just happens over time. And you could keep an eye on yourself for flexibility and agility. This doesn't mean just waving in whatever wind comes along. It means being strong enough to absorb a change and keep moving. In resilient systems, that triple bottom line that Rebecca mentioned in her keynote informs all your decisions, all the long-term plans and immediate actions. In other words, you don't do anything without stopping to think, what's the economic impact, the environmental impact, and the social impact? And if you have all three of those elements in resilient mode, you have a community that is resilient, or a person. And once again, speaking of sustainability in libraries, Peter Gulkin is the director of the Arlington, Virginia Public Library. And I kind of like that libraries are immediately positioned as anti-waste. I think that many libraries started in the 18th, early 19th century as cost sharing efforts. Books were terribly expensive comparatively, that compared to what they are now. And people thought, well, we'll buy one copy for the whole community and we'll share the book. That has now been expanded into libraries of things. There are tool libraries and fly fishing libraries and ukulele libraries. Um, a great many libraries in Florida and elsewhere are handling cost sharing for objects that people don't need to own but might like to use and borrow very often. So let's talk about safety nets. This whole concept is building your friends as a safety net, as a tool for your resilience. But let's start about, what is your personal safety net in these three areas? For example, an economic safety net might mean you've got a savings account, you have good health habits, so you're not going to be blindsided by a surprise illness. Your retirement plan is on track, more or less. You have some knowledge and understanding of money and your own spending and what life costs. And then go ahead and jot down other things. I would be very interested in your personal economic safety net and what might be involved in it. A working spouse, that could help. Or living in community, that could help. Now, your personal environmental safety net, this is just your very personal world. A nice clean house and car, a storehouse for things you might need, a home that is a kind of sense of sanctuary. So your environment, both in terms of health and measurable pollutants, is clean and pure as it can be. It's also pleasant for you. It's a place to recharge and re-energize. And I think that part of environment is quite important. Your social safety net, this isn't hard to know about. It's your circle of friends. It's your relationships with your neighbors. It's your family, other interest groups or your church groups. And again, jot down a few other items that might include and contribute to your personal safety net. It might be fun to sit down with your family even and draw a net, literally draw a net and put the elements in there that are your safety net elements. In talking about the library's own safety net, any organization, but the library specifically, what would an economic safety net look like for a library? Well, there'd be some money in the bank in reserve. It might mean alternate or multiple sources of money. As Rebecca pointed out, tax money is going to be tight. Public funding for all kinds of things. And if you also have a foundation or some private contributions that help your library keep moving, that helps with your safety net. Even more helpful, perhaps, is a very strong advocacy network, a friends group, for example, who is ready with talking points and arguments and the case, why the library is important and why its funding should be continued and continue. Part of that safety net is also the advocacy network, those people who are connected to decision makers, who can call the county commission, who can call some of the senior staff, who can call officials and decision makers of all kinds and have some influence. That's part of your safety net, your economic safety net, quite specifically. And again, jot down anything else you can think of. Your library's environmental safety net is considerable. You could look at your own energy usage, for example, and be a model, as Rebecca suggested, be a model for the community in paying close attention to environmental matters. I love the phrase, I think it's Lawrence Ferlinghetti, when he was talking about City Lakes Bookstore, that's the old beatnik era in San Francisco, a clean, well-lighted place for books. That's what he called a bookstore or a library. I think just plain clean, well-lighted place is a good place to start. It's also a virtual place now, very important point. The library's social safety net has to do with the knowledge and value that people in your community place on the library. Your library is going to be pretty safe in a crisis if almost everyone who lives in your community, who is part of the library's constituency, values it and knows about it, knows what it does. Another part of your social safety net as a library is your sister organizations, your fellow government agencies in the county, your the other cultural organizations in town, private or public, people, individual people who you can call up for quick help if you need it. Hey, my roof is leaking and I need someone over here right now. If you know those folks you're calling to fix the roof, it's going to be easier. Technical support. Gee, what do I do about this new rule? All kinds of expertise that you can call on, part of your social safety net as a library, as a successful institution. And the community safety net, a look at your entire community. Again, similar kinds of things for economics. It's a reserve in public funds and lots of affordable housing and lots of jobs and lots of diverse jobs, some in food, some in hospitality. You know, if you're all skiing all the time, I live in Vermont now, so that's the skiing thing. If you're all skiing all the time, your community's going to go downhill in a bad year, for a bad snow year, for example. If you're all restaurants and hotels, a time like COVID, pretty quiet there, huh? Your environmental safety net means good planning for all kinds of difficult changes, whether they be the slow drip of climate change or COVID hitting by surprise or an oil spill, perhaps. Being ready is part of your environmental safety net. High public awareness of the importance of an environmental safety net, of the importance of respect for the environment, really helps. If your public all wants the same thing or similar aligned kinds of goals, it's going to be a lot easier to make any policy changes that need to be made to make this happen. Another part of an environmental safety net, in my opinion, is immediate transparency in addressing problems. If you look at the various governors and various leaders in this country and their approach to the COVID-19 crisis, there's an interesting range in the governors who are ready to say the absolute worst might happen, and here's what the science says, and here's what I know, and here's what I don't know, and here's what I want you to do. Clarity is incredibly helpful, and transparency in I don't know yet, for example, is incredibly helpful in helping people feel, even though they're out of control of the situation largely, there are a few things they can control and you feel safer right away. Your social safety net, again, it's open communication among citizens and officials, a community that's working well and resilient. People feel like they could call their county commission or the mayor or the library director or other kinds of leaders and officials. There'll be lots of citizen engagement in a resilient safety net kind of community, people serving on boards and on commissions and ad hoc committees. Good and equitable medical systems make a huge difference in social safety net. Financial and referral help for people who are in need. There's often a lot of help out there. It's very hard to connect to. And robust schools and libraries and the arts, all of that is social safety net material and contributes to community resilience. That's what we're really talking about here. Safety nets are one way to describe resilience, kind of old-fashioned way. Friends of the library themselves both need a net and they weave a net for their library. Resilience friends groups have good fiscal management. They're clear on their environmental issues and their environmental impact. They have a robust social network with lots of different kinds of people in the leadership and lots of members, as well as really good connections throughout the community. That's a resilient group. No group is perfect, and lots of friends groups are now bemoaning, gee, we're all the same demographic. We need more young people. We need more diversity. We need a different makeup or more in our friends group. And that's something you could move up to the priority list and start thinking about that. Any library who's lucky enough to have a friends group like this more or less in place will find that when the crisis hits, it's easier. It's a little easier. The friends themselves are a safety net. You can call them. They can help spread the word about what the library can and can't do. For example, now during COVID, when the doors are closed, actually most libraries can deliver almost every service in some form without anyone coming into the building. So it's something to think about. And friends who can articulate that to those people who are saying, I miss the library, I can't check out any books. If it's a friend saying, well, actually you can, let me show you. It's a lot easier than calling the library to say, can you hook me up on my e-reader that I have never used and I know I don't like? Friend to friend is a little easier. So there are many ways in which your friends group is a safety net. They're also going to call the county commission. They're going to be in touch with decision makers. They're going to keep the library in the top of the mind of people who need to be reminded that the library is a crucial institution. So friends are part of your safety net and a very important part of your safety net. Forgive me here. I seem to have a little screen sharing issue. Not sure why. Bear with me for a second. This is going to be odd. Let's try this. Okay. Keith Richards. I really just like sprinkling his quote occasionally into slides because, again, remember, these are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about. Libraries are incredibly important, but for some reason, we need to remind our decision makers of that fact every which way we can think of, every minute of every day. We need to constantly be thinking of ways to say that. Keith Richards said it really well. When you're growing up, there's two places that affect you most powerfully. The church belongs to God and the public library, which belongs to you. I kind of like the connection there. Why don't you assess your library's resilience? Take a good look, pull out a pencil and paper if you can, or something to write with, computer. Here's a few questions, and you can think of some other ones as you get to work on this. How is your safety net? How is your resilience for your library? Do you have a lively, diverse group of friends? Lots of people who know a lot about the library and love talking about it to other people. If you don't, or if you could use some work on this, think about ways to beef that up a bit. Do you, as a library, as a person, have connections to statewide, national, or regional library systems? Florida is one of the best connected states. The MLCs are particularly active in keeping libraries connected to each other and in providing connections to all kinds of information and people and expertise at every level for their member libraries. Not every state has the equivalent of Florida's MLCs, so enjoy them and appreciate them. And when their funding comes up in the legislature, jot a little note about how valuable they are. Connections to other agencies. Rebecca, again, in her keynote, talked about let's get aligned so we're all aiming for roughly the same thing or congruent things rather than just living in a silo. So what are the museums or art galleries or schools in your town or county doing? How about the media? Do you have a good relationship with local radio, television, newspapers, or online news sources? Stay connected and nurture those connections. That's all going to help strengthen that safety net. Think of lots of fishermen constantly weaving and repairing this net. Wide knowledge and appreciation by the public of what the library does. This is related to lively and diverse friends group, but it's wider. And a good friends group will help this happen. And your own formal communications or public relations or community relations efforts will do the same. But if the people in your area know what the library has, whether they use it often or not, but if they're aware of it and they value it for people, it's going to help your survival and your resilience, particularly in times of low funding, enormously. And if this is a little bit weak, think about that. I think one of the best investments any library can make is some formal conversation about messaging, and about who needs to hear what about the library in order for us to continue to survive happily. Do you have multiple sources of funds? Do you have solid reserve funding? Do you have confidence in your fiscal management? Do your library director and board chairs and people who need to know understand how to manage money and what library budgeting and capital management looks like and planning? So confidence with regard to fiscal management really is part of your safety net. A good relationship with your colleagues in government and other public service agencies. This is key. And you might say, well, why would I need to have a sit-down chat with the fire chief? Well, I think it's just dandy for the fire chief to know who the librarian is, and you're roughly equals in county hierarchy, perhaps. And you might need his advice when it comes to meeting room management or new sprinkler system or any number of things. And if you're already friends, that's great. Planning for increased energy efficiency, there's never enough. You can always do better. There's lots of resources out there. Take a good look at your building, do an energy audit, see what you think. There are plenty of places to go for help, and if people have questions about that, I can provide that after the conference. Your library is the go-to place for community information. Would people think to go to the library as soon as something happens? Oh, hurricane. Wow, I wonder if the libraries are fielding information, are providing a clearinghouse for information about what's next. Or, whoops, COVID. So what other factors might you use to assess your library's resilience? Think about this. And I urge you, whether you are library director, library manager of some kind, a paraprofessional, or a library friend, or just a very active user. I don't know who you are in this group, but I urge you to sit down together, start with this list or make your own, and assess your resilience and see what kinds of safety nets you have in place, which safety nets need to be strengthened or rewoven a little bit. Your next steps, yep, here we go. Assess your safety net. Identify the strengths and the gaps. And I can't say this often enough, get together and talk about it. The COVID-19 crisis has set all the world back on its heels. And this is a collective, wow, gasp. But this gives us a chance to really open conversations about resilience and the triple bottom line and preparedness, and say, COVID has shone a Klieg light on some of the gaps nationally in our medical system, in our food delivery systems. Turns out we learned that 70% of our food comes from 5 counties in California, or something similar to that. Don't quote me on the exact numbers, but that's roughly the way it works. And if those semis that are bringing you your lettuce or oranges that are taking the semis that are taking your oranges off to other places, for some reason stop working, hey, what happens? We need to know about our systems. And again, from the keynote, the urging to think locally and to learn how to do stuff, learn how to manage things, learn the things our ancestors knew, something about growing food, making your own clothing. She didn't mention build your own shelter, but perhaps that'd be something. The tinkerers and makers of the world are, this is their time. This is their time. Ingenuity and imagination are going to pay off big time. And I think, again, COVID has made it clear. And I think if you sit down and talk about it, you're going to have fresh minds and a new way of thinking about environmental, economic, and community resilience that aren't just the same old, same old. While you're talking to each other, get with other people in the area who are using the sustainability resilience model, who are thinking about the triple bottom line. They might be private corporations, they might be government. Um, I think there's one state or two states in the country that even use that gross happiness index that Rebecca mentioned, and really assess the well-being of people, which I think is quite important. Make plans together. If this isn't happening in your community, convene a meeting. The library is the perfect convener. Let's get all the public managers together and talk about sustainability and safety nets. Let's do it for a morning and see what happens. Who better to do this in your community than the library? It also raises your visibility and increases people's understanding of the importance of the library. And before we close for questions, and I have a couple of just food for thought items after this, I'd love you to jot down a personal commitment, at least one thing that you are going to do this week as a result of something that you picked up during this conference. So far, you've had the keynote and this. There will be more. But keep notes about what it is you personally might like to do. This is a personal scale kind of thing. Is it read more about the value of libraries? Learn more about the triple bottom line model. Investigate in my community who is interested in this. And then the organizational commitments, just to start with one or two steps that your library or your friends group, or both, might start to increase resilience. For example, maybe the friends group wants to diversify and increase its membership. That's a good project. That's a good year you could spend on that project with focus and do very nicely, but it would be a valuable thing to do. Or a library's organizational commitment. Tomorrow I'm going to call up, I'm going to schedule an energy audit, by gosh. Or a bigger organizational commitment, I'm going to start connecting to other government agencies in my community who are interested in this same subject and talk about ways we work together and align our efforts. For example, I mean, there are millions, well, hundreds of possibilities here. So before you leave and get up and walk away from this conference, literally write down what you're going to do as a result. You personally, something small, your organization, something a little bigger to get started. And there's been a lot of research about this. If you actually write it down, you're more likely to do it than if you don't write it down. So do me a favor, write it down. Thank you. There is more information, lots more everywhere about resilience and triple bottom line and all of that. These were some things I was particularly taken with. They're not library sources. One is simply the FEMA's planning for a resilient community, which is actually more disaster preparedness than the kind of overall resilience we're talking about, but it's there and it's pretty good. The Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University, that website is very, very rich and full of examples of communities that are working with them and all kinds of ways in which communities can focus on resilience and think about it. It's full of information. If you want to educate yourself, I think this is a very good place to go first. And I was especially interested in the magazine Futures, which talks about our hunter-gatherer future. Turns out, I did not know this until a few weeks ago when I heard an archaeologist talking about something else, but I investigated. Until only about 12,000 years ago, climate was so erratic and unpredictable globally, everywhere in the world, you couldn't predict the weather in any predictable way. You couldn't say, well, spring usually starts on, and here in Vermont, May 15th, I can plant the tomatoes. In fact, nobody could plan. And one archaeological theory goes like this: because climate was so erratic, we couldn't plan well enough to have settled agriculture because we couldn't stay in one place because we didn't know what it was going to be like in a year. nor could we plant crops because we couldn't think a year ahead because the climate was so erratic. So therefore, we were hunter-gatherers. It's a connection I hadn't heard before, but it does support the idea that the more stuff you know how to do, the more adaptable you're going to be, whatever climate change has in store for us. These are just a few of my favorite things to remember. I think we all need to pump up our sense of the value of our libraries. Cronkite said it right. It's cheap and absolutely important to democracy. One of my all-time favorite movies with Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy. This was where Katharine Hepburn's a librarian fighting with a computer. She actually wins. It's very dated, but it's a wonderful movie. And what would we do without our libraries, darling? And Bill Harley, a kid's entertainer. Once a kid learns a library is hers to use as she wants, the world opens up. And that is very, very true. People who are library literate and library lovers have bigger worlds than other people. Believe it. Paula Poundstone never fails to delight. The truth is that libraries are raucous clubhouses for free speech, controversy, and community. And I want to reiterate that this is true whether you can walk in the building or not. Right now, a lot of libraries, you can't get in the building or you're just starting to reopen. But in fact, the libraries, the resilient libraries in the face of COVID, opened everything but the building. So you could take classes, you can check out books, you can check out movies, you can listen to audiobooks, you can call a library and learn how to use your e-reader that you never touched before. And libraries that are really resilient are sending word out to people, getting the word out a lot of different ways, and inviting people to get in touch any way they can, and except for coming through the door. It's a real mindset switch. Two of my own best friends, similar age, similar education to me, which is early baby boomer and college, the kind of an ordinary demographic. A lot of my friends are saying, I hate that the library's closed, I can't get books. I say, yes, you can. They say, I don't know how, and I hate that thing. I say, let me show you, maybe you won't hate it quite as much, and it's a little better. Oh, wow, thanks, this isn't so bad. Now I can read, or now I can see a movie. Now I can check out an audiobook. I get it. Thank you. I'm going to take some time. This is just very pithy. Senator Landrieu from Louisiana. Who doesn't love this? I imagine somebody out there. And Maya Angelou. Yes. Libraries, reading, and libraries connect us to everyone in the world in some way or another. It helps us see our common humanity in a way that's really beneficial to resilience, sustainability, everything. Einstein, relativity maybe, but here's one thing you really have to know. Not kind of, but for sure. Where's the library? And that includes now how do I get there online? And once I'm there, how do I get around online? Televisits, very important. Sandra Day O'Connor. Mike Tyson touting books. Shelby Foote. Stories. Libraries hold on to keep the stories for us and the secrets. And I kind of love that notion. And we all should remember about stories that's when you're talking about the library, have some stories ready on the tip of your tongue, rehearse them. And Lady Bird said it right too. The only requirement is interest. That's the only thing you need to get into the library or log into the library. And it's the most democratic institution in our town, in our country. I think you could make that case. Okay. Why do we need libraries when there's so much information everywhere? It's about as smart as asking, do we need road maps? Now there's so many roads. The library is the temple. And remember, this learning has liberated more people than all the wars in history. This goes back to the vital nature of the library as an institution. I think a lot of us have seen this. Neil Gaiman is one of our great supporters. Again, the connection to libraries and democracy, lots of journalists are on that bandwagon. Make friends with your local journalists. There still are some, I promise. An enormous force for good. So at this point, I would love to entertain any questions that you have, if indeed I can find where to read them. Let's see, chat, here we are. Okay, mostly it looks like everybody just heard. So let me ask you this question to type into chat. Has anybody jotted down what they want to do as a result of hearing anything they've heard so far today? An action you're going to take? Looks like I'm not seeing anything coming through. Okay, I have time then. I'm going to tell you a little story about library resilience. Phoenicia, New York is a town. It's a little hamlet. It's unincorporated little town in the Catskill Mountains. It has 3,000 people in a very large area. In the town, Phoenicia itself, the little hamlet, has about 400 people, a couple hundred households. Its library was right in the middle of the 2-block long town and was very well used, very crowded, very small. And several years ago, it burned to the ground one night in a fire. And luckily, the adjoining buildings were saved, but the library and all of its collections, everything in the building was useless, burnt up, gone. Within a week, that library was open for story time, book lending and borrowing, computer searching, computer help, reference, pretty much everything libraries do. How is that possible? Let me tell you the resilience factors that library had. First of all, a very good relationship with town government. Town government happened to have a house, a regular old house that was vacant. And they said, here, use our house. Put whatever you want in our house while you're figuring out what to do with the library building. So that was one part of a safety net. They had lots of very good friends who brought their brand new best-selling books in right away to get labeled and lendable. They were part of the Mid-Hudson Library System, which provided computer support and a shared catalog and a courier service so that library users could go online, see what's available in the system, click order, and get it delivered to that new building that the library was in. Gradually, the collection built. Gradually, the use continued. The library really just hiccuped and moved a little bit, even though it had a devastating fire. By the way, the end of the story is delightful. The library now has raised a bunch of money, understandably, community safety net, and built one of the very first passive standard energy efficient libraries in the country. And it won some New York Library Association awards. But the point is really that services resumed in a week after the building burned down. I know another library in another small town in another state that had a flooding crisis with its sprinkler system, and it was closed completely for months. So the people in that town had no way to to obtain library services for free. They could go to a neighboring town and borrow books for money, but that's not the same thing. Now, let's see what we have here. Okay. So I was asked, see if we have more friends. Oh, here we have some things people are going to do. Lots of word of mouth, and have more friends join the friends at the library. The group is small. Seems to be the overriding first thing to do. All of that said, it looks as though our time is pretty much nearing up. And I want to thank you all for being here. I wish I could see your faces and engage in some real conversation, but we'll do that another time. If you have any questions that come up, I am delighted to answer them. Ray will forward anything to me. Also, copies of this presentation and pretty much everything else will be made available. So I'd like to thank you, and that's it. So long.
Well, thank you very much, Lawrence. And as I said in the beginning, you will receive an email shortly after today's conference containing a link to a brief survey on your experiences with the conference. Please complete this survey. It gives us guidance in developing events for Florida Library staff and makes an impact on our funding for the future. And you will also receive a link to a copy of the recording of this session. And once we get things sorted out, I will send along Lawrence's handout from today. And just in case you do not know, we've got another session coming up this afternoon at 1 o'clock. We're going to take some time out for lunch. Creating a more resilient library budget through community engagement with John Kraska of Every Library. I just popped a link to it there in the chat if you want to go ahead and sign up for that particular session. You'll be good to go, and we will see y'all back here in about an hour or so. If not, have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of the day. And thanks for coming in.